All right, good evening everyone and welcome to the JFK Junior Forum at the Institute of Politics. My name is Jackson and I'm a freshman studying social studies and economics at the college. And I'm also a member of the John F. Kennedy Junior Forum Committee. Before we begin, please note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and the JFK Street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please walk to the exit closest to you and congregate in JFK Park. Please also take a moment now to silence your cell phones and join me in welcoming Harvard undergraduate Natasha Pereira.
Thank you, Jackson. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the JFK Junior Forum. My name is Natasha Pereira, and I'm an undergraduate at the college studying economics and English. Tonight's forum could not be more timely. When we talk about U.S. competitiveness, it's easy to think in those abstract terms of GDP and productivity, job growth. But today, that conversation feels much more immediate. Tariffs, once maybe a niche topic in my economics class, are completely reordering international relations. Supply chains are shifting, markets are reacting, and retirement funds are taking hits. What used to be that quiet tool of trade policy has become the centerpiece of global tension. For decades, the United States built its global leadership on innovation, talent, and an economy that other countries aspired to emulate. But now, our trade alliances, carefully built across generations and party lines, are beginning to fray under the weight of this administration's recent economic activity. At the same time, countries like China and India are expanding their influence, investing heavily in their own capacity to lead. So while other nations are thinking strategically and long-term, the United States often struggles to pass a budget. So then the question we face now is, can the U.S. stay competitive in a world that's just not waiting for us to figure it out? This isn't about returning to a so-called golden era. It's about maintaining economic leadership in a way that supports shared growth and global prosperity. That's why tonight's forum is especially relevant. Joining us is Gina Raimondo. Gina Raimondo served as the U.S. Secretary of Commerce from 2021 to 2025 and the Governor of Rhode Island from 2015 to 2021. As governor, she focused on workforce development, infrastructure, and economic revitalization. At Commerce, she led major economic initiatives like the CHIPS Act to strengthen domestic manufacturing and tech competitiveness. Her experience at both state and federal politics is what gives her such a unique, practical perspective on what drives sustainable economic growth. Moderating tonight's forum is Jeff Liebman, the director of the Taubman Center for State and Local Government and the Robert W. Scrivner Professor of Social Policy. His research focuses on government performance, on public finance, and social policy, bringing this forum a deep expertise in how policy decisions are shaping our everyday economics. So please join me in welcoming tonight's guests with a warm round of applause.
Thank you, Natasha, for that introduction. You've saved me a lot of time. I'm going to shorten my questions because I don't have to explain the economic context. You did such a nice job of that. Welcome back to Harvard, Secretary.
Great to be here.
And thank you to the IOP team who figured out that this was the week that the World Economic Order was going to be unmade and remade every 3 hours and for scheduling this today. Secretary Raimondo, I guess I'd love to, Natasha talked about your long career in public service, and I'm curious where that came from. And I don't know, what was it like sitting around the dinner table at your house growing up? And how did you end up on this path?
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I remember I was an undergrad here, and I used to come here all the time to listen to these talks. When I was an undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to do after college. So if you find yourself in that spot, don't sweat it, it'll all work out. And you might take a few different tries at some things, and that's okay. My dinner table was loud, crowded, awesome food. Like any self-respecting Italian family, we had 7 people, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, but 2 kitchens. And the real food, the real cooking happened in the downstairs kitchen, which is where we ate. But truth be told, it was not very political. It was not political, except in my case, when Ronald Reagan was elected, my parents were quite anti-Reagan. because my dad was constantly saying, what about the little guy who gets up in the morning and goes to work? That was the entire steady diet every night. And what he would say, what about the person who gets up and goes to work every day? Who's sticking up for us? And also my family was very, like they worked, we were never poor, we got by. And so it's interesting, they also were very much like, and you see this today, a little bit, you know, they never qualified for what they would call a handout. And so they weren't hugely for that. And so that was another thing I grew up with, like the value of work. My grandpa, who lived with us until he passed, was an Italian immigrant, was obsessed with work, obsessed with the American dream, to the point that if you ever, God forbid, you tried to take a nap or rest, he'd be like, Gina, get off the couch, sweep the floor, do something for your country. And you're like, Pop, how is sweeping the floor helping with the country? But like work. So it's very much like that. And I think as I got older and I saw the American dream being out of grasp for a lot of people, hard work not being quite enough to achieve that American dream, it motivated me to get into politics to level the playing field, to give people a shot.
All right, I'm going to move forward a little bit to when you were governor. The first time I ever saw you in your governor's office, you'd asked for some help turning around the agency that deals with families where the parents are neglecting or abusing their children, often because the parents are suffering from substance use issues. So one of the hardest things government does.
Yeah.
And Rhode Island was unfortunately, at the time when you took over, first in the nation, all the things you'd like to be last in the nation in terms of children who are never unified with their families and things like that. And I came to your office and you said you wanted us to get 30% better performance and spend 80% as much. And I said, Governor, we can't do that. I can get you 30% better performance, but we're going to need to spend all the money we're spending. And we started doing the work, and you turned out to be right. There was so poor financial management going on in the agency that almost overnight, with just some simple controls, it stopped having the cost overruns that meant you had to go back to the legislature for more. So, more generally, I think I've seen you in many contexts be someone who's willing to basically break eggs and not accept how government is functioning. And I'm curious whether, given that, do you see Elon Musk as a kindred spirit and this Doge effort as someone who's willing to break things to fix them, or I don't know, how do you react to what's going on right now?
Well, I don't know if he's interested to break things to fix them so much as he might be interested to break things so that his companies can then sell products to the government to fix them, or just break things to break them because you hate government and don't care so much about the people that you're serving. Having said all of that, I also don't think we should defend things the way they're working just because it's the way it's been done. And I've been a bit of a disruptor my whole time in government. When I was first state treasurer, I inherited what I thought was a broken, dysfunctional pension system. And I fixed it. And it was super hard. And all constituencies in my party and the entire legislature in Rhode Island, which was mostly Democrats, told me to leave it alone. Politics are too tough, leave it alone. But I couldn't. I just couldn't sleep at night knowing when I dug into the numbers. Doug Elmendorf taught me how to dig into the numbers. I became an actuary. I was like, this is not going to work. My kid's first grade teacher, who's public school teacher, who's 35 years old, is not going to have a pension in 35 years when she needs it. So I couldn't. So I took it on and I fixed it. Public schools need a ton of reform. I just did a class with Mike Donlin. A young man asked me, what do you think about career and technical education? I think it works, and we don't do enough of it. So there's a lot of waste. We shouldn't pretend there's not. I saw tons of waste, bureaucracy, unnecessary regulation when I was governor. Let's not pretend it doesn't exist. Let's get rid of it. So listen, I think that we need to streamline government, clear out the underbrush of regulation, innovate, deliver services differently. I mean, the way kids go to school, the way most people interact with government, if you're in the foster system, if you're getting a license, the way you go to school is pretty much the same as it was 50 years ago. We got to fix that. We got to modernize that. We can be better, faster, more efficient, and so that is what I believe in. However, execution matters, and you can't hurt people in the process, and breaking things for breaking things' sake, I think, is no good.
When I was doing work in your state when you were governor, there was two leadership, I think, tactics or strategies that I saw you use, and then saw all of your cabinet secretaries seem to incorporate it and use it themselves with their teams. And one was anytime a leader said, asked the team, how long would something take? And the person said, 4 months. The cabinet secretary, I think channeling you, would say, why can't we do it in 2 months? That was one thing. And the second was, I saw more than any other leader I've ever worked with, you figured out how to ask everyone to help Rhode Island when you're there. I mean, every foundation, every university, every consulting firm, everyone who had good ideas, you figured out how to bring them in to come help your state. So I'm curious, what have I missed about your leadership philosophy and technique? What do you see as the things that made you successful as a leader?
By the way, those things are true. In fact, when I became governor and secretary, I called so many people. You know, I meet people and they say, I'd be happy to help, give me a call. They don't actually think I'm going to call, except I called everyone back. I'm like, you offered, so by the way, could you do this, could you do that? And my view was I needed all the help I could get. It's hard to make change in government because the system is designed to go slow. So you really have to be unbelievably ambitious. When I first became governor, Bill Clinton was the first guy to call me to congratulate me. Gave me a ton of good advice. He said, in government, if you get 30% done of what you want to achieve, you're a success. Now, like a lot of you, I was used to getting A's. I wasn't used to getting 30% on a test. So I thought, come on, I can do better than 30%. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. And so what you got to do is you got to aim really high, really fast, push your team, and if you get half done on what you think you're going to get done, it's a win. Other things about me. Look, I think the reality is I'd like to think that the reason I get great people to work for me is because they trust me, because they know I'm not in it for me, I'm in it for the work. When I was secretary, I had to recruit a team of people to implement the CHIPS Act. I recruited 150 people. I recruited pretty amazing people. I got people to sell all their NVIDIA stock to come work for me. Guy left Goldman, he ran investment banking and tech. You have to sell all your stocks to come into the government. Here's my pitch. I showed up in their office. I need you to come work for me. You work 7 days a week. I can't pay you. You have to sell all your stock, but it's good for America. And I'm not leaving your office till you say yes. But I did the same thing, right? I left my job, I took a giant pay cut, I loved every bit of it, and I promised them, I'll do the political interference. You do the work. You do what you think is right. Get to the right answer, and I'll deal with the politics. And if you come under fire because you're doing the right thing and it's politically difficult, I'll take care of it. And so I think at the end of the day, you just got to be a principled leader. Why are you in this? Are you in it for you? Are you in it to get reelected, or are you in it to serve? And if you're in it to serve, as I was and am, you get good people to work for you.
All right, let's talk about the economy and U.S. competitiveness. I think coming out of COVID, I think we all had a greater realization about the fragility of supply chains, that lots of things we took for granted were at risk just because of if any country shut down at all, but particularly having important components or goods in the hands of adversaries or potential adversaries, suddenly I think we started to realize how risky that was. I mean, the fact that they're pharmaceuticals that are only produced in China, and if they chose not to send them to us, in retaliation for what Trump's up to right now, that would sort of be a catastrophe. So I'm curious, you came into the Biden administration just as the realization and understanding of this issue was emerging, and could you talk a little bit about how the Biden economic team thought about what we needed to do to make supply chains more robust than they were, pre-2020?
Yeah. The first thing we had to do, and we did this in my department, was actually understand the complexity of supply chains. It's amazing how poorly understood supply chains are. In fact, most CEOs in this country, except for maybe, Apple and a few big companies, they don't understand their supply chain. They know their tier 1 supplier and their tier 2 supplier, but when you get below that to tier 5, 6, and 7, the supplier to the supplier to the supplier, they don't know. So when I first came into office, true story, we didn't know either. And I would get tons of calls from the White House. Hey, what's going on with the, windshield wiper supply chain, the pacemaker supply chain, the chip supply chain? And I literally had like 5 guys on a spreadsheet inputting data. So the first thing we did was we built all new analytics. So we had excellent dynamic view for critical supplies like pharmaceuticals. What's the geopolitical risk? What's the labor risk? What's the climate risk? So data is like key. And then under President Biden's leadership, we got to work making friends with other countries. I think one of the president's greatest successes and what he was so good at was developing allies. He knew and led us in a way that was like, America can't and shouldn't go it alone. America is best when we make friends. So he sent us, me, a lot of us, to Southeast Asia a lot. Develop relationships with Indonesia and have offtake agreements with their nickel. Develop relationships with the Philippines and, offtake agreements. So I think he was extremely focused on, like, first the data, where's the vulnerability, developing alliances, and then for certain things, like semiconductor chips, which were vital, which we make none of in America, the leading edge chips. We passed the CHIPS Act because we have to make that in America.
How much progress did we actually make through the CHIPS Act? I mean, if you sort of think of the risk, there are lots of different kinds of semiconductors that go into lots of different kinds of products. Some of them are now going to be made in the US, but there's still going to be a lot made in a lot of other places.
Totally.
Should we think of this as, we made 20% of the progress we need to make? Or, we got the critical ones and everything else will take care of itself and we could build those factories fast if we had to? How much progress should we think we made?
So it's an awesome question and it's a complicated topic. Most semiconductors are kind of a commodity, and many of them are made overseas. A lot in China, actually. And it wouldn't be a disaster. It wouldn't be a national security disaster if there was a backlog of iPhones. You might think so, but it really wouldn't be. Or if, certain things in your, watches or whatever. But for example, artificial intelligence, all AI runs on leading edge chips. So much of our intelligence gathering capacity depends on leading edge chips. Satellites that the military use, leading edge chips. So that's directly related to our national security, and we make 0 in the United States. By the end of the decade, 2030, we will be making about 1/4 of those leading edge chips in America. We're on that path. I feel quite sure it will happen. As long as it doesn't get screwed up. But so yeah, that's a success, right? That's a success. When we went into it, I made the team write a strategy paper to say this is what we're going to try to achieve, which actually drove members of Congress crazy because everyone just wanted to know which company is getting how much money. And I refused to answer that question. I said, first, let's talk about what we have to achieve. We said we need to go from 0% of leading edge chips to 20%. Right now, we don't do any packaging of chips, 0 in America, leading edge. We said we have to have packaging. We don't really do much R&D. We have to do R&D. So we had like goals. We had to scale memory in the United States. All that'll be done. So is it enough? It's never enough. But is it achieving the goals of the legislation? Yes. And here's a super important point. We insisted that for every dollar of taxpayer money we put out there, $10 of private sector money would come in. Lots of economists, probably your teachers, don't like industrial strategy. They don't like the government messing with markets. Because for all kinds of good reasons, by the way. But we said if we do it in a way that crowds in capital and does national security, it's worth it. I'm very proud to say when I left, we had about $13 for every dollar of taxpayer money that we put in. 13 private sector. So yeah, net, I think it's a success.
Thank you. So you talked about going around the world making friends. President Trump likes to point out that some of our friends don't seem to buy our products. He points out that Japan, Europe, South Korea, you don't see a lot of American cars on their streets. Does he have a point? Are our allies taking advantage of us in trade?
Yeah, in some cases. In some cases, yes. I do think, look, we need reform in trade. Free trade is great if everyone plays by the rules. Not everyone plays by the rules. China does not play by the rules. You don't see a lot of American cars in China. BYD makes a great car, it's true. But they've been massively subsidized by the Chinese government. Europe tariffs U.S. cars at a much higher rate than we do to European cars. So I think having more reciprocity is reasonable. And I think holding countries like China, for example, or other countries that don't play by the rules, that subsidize what they make and then dump those subsidized products into the global market, tank the price, makes it impossible to compete. Like sticking up for American workers and companies in a way that there's a more level playing field and reciprocity, yes. That, however, is not what is being executed now by this White House. Right? Like that would call for some precision and thoughtfulness and reasonable implementation. So I do want to say yes, he has a point, but I do not support what's happening now.
What do you think they are doing this week in Washington? Natasha in her introduction did such a nice job of describing the way in the last 80 years the U.S. has led the world in negotiations to bring tariffs down. And I think that's been, as she said, driven by a philosophy that we have the most innovative, most productive workers. And so as long as markets are open, we're going to do great. And somehow that doesn't seem to be the philosophy I don't know if philosophy is the right word. That doesn't seem to be the impact of what they're doing. I don't know what is driving it. What do you make of what's going on?
I don't know. I don't know how they think. I don't know. I don't want to speculate. I know it's not working. I know people are going to get hurt. And I know, here's what I know. I know that with this level of unpredictability, it's much more likely that we're going to wind up in a recession than I would have predicted a few months ago. Because every business is saying, let's wait, let's not hire, let's not invest, let's not take out a loan. Uncertainty, unpredictability means people stop. And that feeds on itself. I know countries are thinking twice, can we trust America? Even if they do negotiate lower tariffs at this point, so what's going to happen in a month? Anyone who's ever negotiated anything or tried to make allies knows trust is the coin of the realm. So I can't pretend to understand the logic of what's happening. Look, the reality is a lot of Americans got hurt because of loss of manufacturing or because of unfair trade. The gains of free trade were disproportionately, benefited some people and hurt others. People in certain states, people in manufacturing, people without a college degree. And that's real pain. And we have to provide a real solution, but that isn't what's happening now.
When I came back from the Obama administration, having worked on the Affordable Care Act, I taught a class with a colleague in the government department on the politics of healthcare reform, and I thought everyone was going to, be congratulating me on getting the, playing a part in getting the Affordable Care Act through. But instead, my colleague lit into me and said, how did you not have the public option in this plan? It was terrible what you did. You missed the chance. And of course, my view is we've been trying since Truman to pass healthcare reform, and we actually got through Congress, and that's sort of pretty good. So in that spirit, I'm about to ask you a question about the difference between Bidenomics and Clintonomics and Obama. I can't even say it anymore. Obamanomics. So there is a view by, I think, some of the folks who were in the Clinton and Obama administrations, but not the Biden administration, that there were three differences between the earlier Democratic economics and the Biden one. One was that there was less of a focus on budget constraints and on worrying about the deficit in the Biden administration, that there was sort of a sense that, the Republicans cut taxes and blow up the deficit, and then we clean up the mess. This time we're not going to do it. We're just going to go spend on our things, and someone else can deal with the deficit. I think that was sort of one version of the comparison or the critique. A second was that some of the policies, like on climate, it was great to get a lot of resources toward it, but we didn't do it efficiently. We didn't use price mechanisms. We sort of did a more command and control and spending approach to it. And the third critique, I would say, was something along the lines of, when we were trying to do things like CHIP or do things like climate policy, we tacked on all these efforts to accomplish social policy goals that drove up the price of those policies, and so hindered the progress we could have been making on these things that we thought were so important, like national security on chips and on climate. Do you think any of those critiques of the Biden economic policy are fair?
So look, having had a front row seat to this, remember politics is not perfect. Am I saying we were perfect? Absolutely not. We did get a lot done, though. We got it done. And President Biden was the guy, in many cases, getting it done, on the phone. I saw him on the phone, hustling to get votes. People who make those critiques don't maybe know how hard it is to get something done in a 50-50 Senate. Every senator, every one of whom has a pet project and a pet thing, has the tie-breaking vote. Every one of them. On both sides of the aisle. So, did the president give here and there to tack this, that, and on? Maybe. Is that what he should have done to get it done? I think so. Because, like I say, 50-50 Senate. Tough stuff. And a tiny margin in the House, by the way. But I would also say this, and I take my perspective. I was a governor of Rhode Island during COVID. In the couple months after COVID broke out, Rhode Island's a state of about 1 million people. I had 110,000 people file for unemployment insurance. For unemployment insurance. We had massive unemployment, companies closing. It felt like it was never going to come back. I mean, it was really scary. And it's easy now to look back and say, well, the stimulus shouldn't have been so big, it led to inflation. But nobody said, if it weren't big enough, you would have continued to have that deep, deep, deep unemployment. And in the great financial crisis, what's that? What do you guys call it? Scarring? What do you call it when someone's out of work for so long? Scarring? Arguably, that stimulus could have, should have been bigger. So pick your poison. Yes, we suffered from inflation. I'm not an economist, but I think as much of that had to do with broken supply chains as the stimulus. By the way, many countries faced it. And from my seat as governor, I had a pit in my stomach for a long time. Holy shit, how am I going to get these people back to work? Will this economy ever come back? And so President Biden, you know, it's easy to throw rocks, but when you're in the seat and you got a decision to make and you got a 50-50 Senate, he erred on the side of going big because he lived through the great financial crisis and didn't want to go too small. The other thing is climate. I think he felt, I can't speak for him, I think he felt better to go big than small. It's the existential, crisis. With respect to the social programs, I will go toe-to-toe with anyone, at least on the CHIPS Act, that they're dead wrong. I did require a child care plan from CHIPS companies that wanted our money. It was my thing, and I stand by it. It's not a social program. They need to find workers. They're not going to find enough workers if they don't have women. You're not going to do that unless you have a plan for child care. Worker training. I said, I want to know what's your strategy for training your workforce. Well, I was going to say something about Senator Vance because he went after me in a hearing, but I won't. But anyway, the point is, they weren't social programs. They were labor market programs designed. My job was to be a steward of taxpayer money. And if I gave a company money and they couldn't find the workers to fill the factory, that I'd be doing a bad job protecting taxpayer money. So I think it's wrong.
Thank you. So we're actually only going to go till 6:45 today because the secretary has a plane to catch.
I have a plane.
But she won't be far. She'll come back and spend more time with us some other time. But I'm telling you that because if you want to ask questions, now is a good time to go stand up at the microphones because I'm going to ask one more and then I'm going to turn to the microphones. And I will also remind you who are standing at the microphones to keep your questions short and actually end with a question mark, which is our standard advice here. So my last question for you, Secretary, is the political environment right now can feel a little demoralizing. It can, knowing where to start to try to fix all the things that seem broken can feel a little daunting. What's your advice for the people in the room who are just starting out their careers about, how to think about whether to jump into the fray right now?
It is daunting. No doubt about it. It is daunting. Think about the challenges that climate change presents, income inequality, the politics is very messy. It's a messy business, getting messier, getting tougher, getting more substance-free. But what I do know, so it's daunting, right? It's tough stuff. I played rugby when I was here as a Radcliffe rugger. Awesome training for politics, like very dirty, get the crap kicked out of you. I was the littlest girl on the team. So don't go into public service if you're not prepared to get roughed up a little bit. But what I do know is this. If you decide it's too daunting and sit out, we're never going to solve these problems. But if you use your considerable talent and education and passion to find a way to serve, we will find solutions. We have gone through as a country very dark days. I was in Montgomery, Alabama last week. And I went, if you haven't been to the Legacy Museum, you should go. This country's been through very dark days. We will get through this, but you have to get in the game in whatever way is right for you. Run for office, serve in government, at any level. If you do, things will be better. If you don't, they won't. Democracy is not a spectator sport.
Thank you. Why don't you start over here and please identify yourself before you ask your question.
Hi, my name is Michael Farber. Thanks so much for coming, for your public service. My question would be, if you were president in 2029, we're coming up on the first 100 days of Trump's presidency, what would you do with your first 100?
Probably at that point, whoever's president would have to undo a lot. Truthfully, I would have to see all the mess that was created and quickly undo as much of it as I could. I would hurry up and get around the world and do everything I could to like convince people they could trust America again. And I would put forth a really bold kind of retraining initiative. This country should have universal job training. Everybody at any stage of life should be able to lose a job, get retrained, and get a job. So those are a few things I would do.
Let's come over to this side, please.
Secretary, thanks so much for being here. I'm Rourke. I'm a second year over at the business school, and prior to school, I was in the automotive industry. Question for you. You mentioned BYD in the conversation. You talked, certainly the subsidies were real that they got from the Chinese central government, but they were also one of hundreds of automakers in China to evolve and emerge from that market. I guess my question for you would be, it's one thing to offer subsidies or tariffs for instance, supporting the American automotive industry, but there's also deep cultural and structural reasons why we were uncompetitive in the first place. What are those tools that are available to the public sector to be able to force some of those cultural and structural challenges that aren't going to be fixed otherwise?
I would say much of that should be left to the market. I mean, competition. I believe in, the animal spirits and competition. It's true. BYD, by the way, makes a great car. I don't want to take anything away from that. It's a fantastic car. There are fantastic entrepreneurs and innovators in China. My only point is, the entire supply chain was so subsidized that American companies can't compete with that. So I think the job of the government is to train people, right? Train people, make sure people have a good education, make sure people are able to do it. But competing and having a culture within a company that fosters the kind of efficiency that's required, I think that's up to the company, and I think the private sector in an open market enables that.
Top right here, please.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Hi, Secretary Raimondo. Thanks for being here today. My name is Kevin Curry, and I'm a first year at the law school. And in my home state of Connecticut, and I guess your neighboring state, I've noticed a lot of resistance and a lot of localism when it comes to the issue of building more housing and building infrastructure generally.
Yep.
And I suppose my question is, what is your strategy for convincing NIMBYs who might not want to build housing in their town to change their minds?
I have two thoughts on that. One is, you got to convince people why it's good for them, okay? But here's what I really think. When I was governor, people would I say I wanted to try to do something. Or when I was treasurer, I wanted to pass pension reform. And all the public sector lobbyists would come in and lobby me, protest me, threaten me, whatever. And people would say, doesn't that drive you crazy that they're protesting and lobbying? I said, absolutely not. That's their job. My job is to not be, daunted by that. They're threatening me, clearly. You will not get reelected. Okay, thank you for your view. I'm going to do it anyway because it's the right thing. So we need public servants who will change outdated regulations, change the zoning laws, but quite frankly, take the tough vote, despite the fact that you have 1,000 angry people protesting.
Over here.
Good evening. My name is Carlo Giannone. I'm Italian, I'm Master in Public Policy student here at the Green School. I recall one of your interviews last year in which you were advocating for the ban of electric vehicles from China. And many economists argue that, let's say, hindering competition between the two countries through bans can actually hinder also innovation in the US. My question is if in light, for example, of the rise of DeepSeek or in light of the rise of the biotech market in China, did you change your idea, or if you still believe that because of national security, you would compromise, let's say, American competitiveness?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not in favor of a ban, but here's what I was in favor of and I'm still in favor of. Cars today are they're like an iPhone on wheels. They're totally connected. And so what I am not in favor of is like a BYD car on American roads collecting tons of data on the driver, where the person's going, and all of that going back to Beijing. So my argument wasn't like a economic imbalance or trade argument. It really was a national security argument. So and it wasn't necessarily to ban. If we could really genuinely find a way all the software is American, all the data stays in America. I would be fine with that. The Chinese government wasn't willing to do that.
Here, please.
Hi, Secretary. Thank you for being here. My name is Andrew. I'm a senior at the college. I asked some version of this question to every state level official or anybody who's been a state level official that comes through. My question is, what do you think is one lesson or experience from your time in service at the state level that you think made you a more effective leader in Washington that you would not have gotten if you had started out your career, say, in Congress or in the Senate?
How to run things. Yeah, I mean, when you're a governor, you're going to run things. You're going to balance the budget. You need to hire people. You need to make your own budget in the Commerce Department. You need to manage, lead, and inspire, in my case, 52,000 people who work for me. People in Congress don't run things. They make policy.
All right, one last question. Thank you.
Good evening, Secretary. My name is Joseph. Sorry. My name is Joseph. I'm a current 1L in the law school. We are currently studying Loper Bright v. Raimondo.
Yes.
I'd love to dig into that, but instead, I wanted to ask about, despite all that, there does seem to be a rather polarizing and problematic lack of trust both between institutions, whether it be the administrative power and the judiciary, but also towards institutions, both public and private. I'm curious if your thoughts on that is that trust, lack of trust, warranted or more abnormal for our times? And if the latter, how might you suggest to restore that institutional trust?
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. It seems to me to be at epically high levels. But when I say that to people who lived through the Vietnam era, they tell me I'm wrong. So, but it is warranted because a lot of institutions have let people down. Corruption, you know, I said earlier, not Harvard, but you know, a lot of institutions of higher education, unbelievably expensive. Most students don't graduate. If they graduate, can they get a job that was worthy of the tuition? I mean, on and on and on. You know, Catholic Church, I remember the Catholic Church, like sex abuse scandal, like go through so many institutions. Basically, and President Biden always said this, he would say, democracy has to deliver. Institutions have to deliver. They have to be honest, transparent, principled, and effective. And if they are corrupt in some way or don't deliver, yeah, they let people down. And so how do you fix it? Deliver.
All right, I promised to get the secretary into her car in time.
I appreciate that.
So the two of you who are there, come walk with us. You can ask the question on the way.
Excellent.
All right? The rest, will you join me in thanking the secretary? This is incredibly insightful.